this verse. I'll tell the meaning and then we can discuss it. So, Mam Upetya. Mam, Krishna is speaking this. Unto me, Upetya. So, those who come to me, those who attain me, Punarjanma. Punarjanma is birth again. Mam Upetya Punarjanma. Dukkhalaya Shashvatam. So, Dukkha Alaya, the place of distress. Shashvatam, that which is temporary. So Krishna says that na apnuvanti, they won't attain it. Mahatmanaha, those who attain me, they are great souls. And some siddhim paramam, they have attained. Siddhi is to attain. Some siddhi means completely attain. Paramam gataha, they have attained the supreme destination. So we will focus in our talk on what the implication of this Dukkhalayam Shashvatam is. But let's begin with reciting the verse two times. Mam upetya punarjanma. Mam upetya punarjanma. Dukkhalayam shashvatam. Dukkhalayam shashvatam. Napnuvanti mahatmanaha. Napnuvanti mahatmanaha. Samsiddhim paramam gataha. Samsiddhim paramam gataha. Mam upetya punarjanma. Mam upetya punarjanma. Dukkhalayam shashvatam. Dukkhalayam shashvatam. Napnuvanti mahatmanaha. Napnuvanti mahatmanaha. Samsiddhim paramam gataha. Samsiddhim paramam gataha. Would anyone like to recite?
Mam upetya punarjanma.
Mam upetya punarjanma.
Dukkhalayam ashashvatam.
Dukkhalayam shashvatam.
Napnuvanti mahatmanaha.
Napnuvanti mahatmanaha.
Samsiddhim paramam gataha.
Samsiddhim paramam gataha.
Mam upetya punarjanma.
Mam upetya punarjanma.
Dukkhalayam shashvatam.
Dukkhalayam shashvatam.
Napnuvanti mahatmana.
Napnuvanti mahatmanaha.
Samsiddhim paramam gataha.
Samsiddhim paramam gataha. Mam upetya punarjanma. Dukkhalayam shashvatam. Napnuvanti mahatmanaha. Samsiddhim paramam gataha.
Yes, please.
Mam upetya punarjanma.
Mam upetya punarjanma.
Dukkhalayam shashvatam.
Dukkhalayam shashvatam.
Napnuvanti mahatmanaha.
Napnuvanti mahatmanaha.
Samsiddhim paramam gataha.
Samsiddhim paramam gataha.
Thank you. The verse is Dukkhalayam, but I can see you are Sukhi reciting it. Yeah, we are all happy that you could recite this. Thank you, everyone. So let's begin with some prayers. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana
Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
Namo
Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Keshakarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Vipasindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.
Jai
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda.
Hare
Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. So, just about a month ago, I was speaking at Stanford and I was speaking on the Bhagavad Gita. And there's one person who asked this question. he said, I read the Bhagavad Gita and there is one verse which I have a lot of issues with. And guess which was this word? This one. He said, the whole book seems so philosophical and sound, but then I read this verse, it sounded so pessimistic, so world denying, world rejecting. He said, I felt I want to have nothing to do with such a book. So it is just negating all human effort, human endeavor by saying that this world is a place of distress. So I answered briefly over there, and I developed that answer over the last month or so. I'm planning to have an elaborate article in one of my new books on the Gita. But here I'll talk about it at 3 levels. At the immediate context of the Bhagavad Gita, then the emphasis of this particular text, and then the broader message of the Gita. So contextual, textual and overall, 3 ways we look at what this means. And in the overall part, we look at it practically also. So firstly, if this were pessimistic, if the idea is this world is a place of distress and we all have to be miserable because it's a place of distress, well, then at the start of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was in distress, isn't it? Arjuna was in tears. Tam tatha krupaya vishtam ashrupurna kulekshanam. He was in tears. And as we will say, so many people will be in tears. They will cry. They may cry. But Arjuna's crying is extraordinary. Why? Because he's a warrior. And warriors are trained in their profession to not show pain. Even if they are in pain, they will not show pain. Because as soon as they show any pain, the opponent will see that's a sign of weakness. See, 2 boxers are fighting. And one of the boxers just has a grazing hit at the chin of the other person. And when that just a grazing hit is there, that person winces. Immediately the other boxer will know that, oh, he has some weakness over here, has some maybe previous wound over here. So hit where it hurts till that person gets defeated. So warriors are trained not to show weakness. And Arjuna is in a war. And few things exhibit weakness as much as crying. It's emotional weakness. So Arjuna is trained not to show pain, not to show weakness. And yet he is crying. And not just crying, he is crying in public. He's broken down completely. So clearly he is in great distress. And when Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita, he could have, if the Gita's message had been simply pessimistic, he could have said, Krishna would have come to this verse and he said, Arjuna, this world is a place of distress, you are in distress, therefore Gita's truth is proven, over. He didn't do that. In fact, quite the opposite. Jiva Goswami, one of the prominent acharyas in our tradition, a prominent spiritual teacher, he says that we can understand the message of a book from what is said in the start and what is said at the end. It's like if you want to know what a class is about, especially if the speaker is an organized speaker reasonably. Some speakers they speak spontaneously, they may not be that organized, but if somebody is a very organized speaker, then they may say, today this is what I want to speak about. And at the end, they say this is what I spoke about. So that way, the start and the end can give us a fair idea of the content. So he says, let's look at the first instructive word that Krishna has spoken. Krishna speaks briefly in the first chapter of the Gita. Uvacha partha pashyaitan samavetan guruviti. So he says that for just one verse he speaks in the first chapter. Then in the second chapter he just talks at a friendly level initially. But 2.11 is the first time Krishna speaks instructively. And the first word he says is ashochan. Ashochan means that which is not worth lamenting. Implication is don't lament. And the last instructive word is in 1866. Ma shuchaha. Shuchaha can mean doubt, it can more technically it means lament. So the first word is not worth lamenting. And the last word is don't lament. In between, Krishna is giving a worldview which will help us see, will at least help Arjuna see, that what he is lamenting about is not worth lamenting about. That means the purpose of the Gita is actually to free Arjuna from lamentation. Now, lamentation essentially is an expression of distress. So, far from the book being pessimistic, and saying that this world is a place of distress, so everybody has to be in distress. Far from that, the purpose of the book is to free Arjuna and by extension all of us from distress. So, no way does Krishna use the statement to either justify or perpetuate Arjuna's distress. So that's in the context of the broader book. Then if you look in this verse itself, is the dukkhalem ashashvatam. It's almost like an incidental point. The focus of Krishna is those who worship me, those who attain me, they will not take birth in this world which is a place of distress, but they will come to my abode, and in this way they will attain the supreme perfection. So it's like a passing point. Okay, say somebody is living in maybe a underprivileged area, and they say, if you get this scholarship, you will move to a college where your living conditions will be much more comfortable. You won't have to come back and live over here. So the point is not to say that this place you are living in is a terrible place. That's like, okay, it's a point it is made, but it's a passing point. The point is, if you do this, you can go beyond this. And Krishna is talking about Paramam Gataha, the supreme destination. That destination doesn't just refer to a physical, like a literal destination. It can also refer to consciousness. Krishna says that if we become devoted to Him, if we attain Him, means that the Bhagavad Gita says that Krishna is right here with us, and we are also right here. Both of us are in our hearts. But what has happened is, although Krishna is very close to us, we are very far away from Him. Now, how is that possible? If one person is close to us and we can be very far away from Him, that happens when one person is turned away from God. Krishna is very close to us, but we are very far away from Him. One comedian said that, my wife and I, we live in different rooms, we eat in different kitchens, we drive different cars, we come and go out of our home to different doors. We are doing everything possible to keep our marriage together. Now, what is there for the togetherness? They are already separated for all practical purposes. So the idea is that two people may be physically together, but they may be very far away from each other. So like that, Krishna and we are very close to each other in the heart, but we are far away because we are turned away from Krishna. If we turn toward Krishna, then we can experience His presence even now. And when we experience His presence, that is a state where we will rise above the distress of the world. So the point of this verse also is not to emphasize that this world is a place of distress and you stay in distress. This Krishna offers us a consciousness, a pathway to raise our consciousness by which we can go beyond distress. So that's the second point from this verse itself. So the context of the Gita, the text of this verse. Now let's look at the overall message. That will be the major part of this discussion. But any questions at this point? Yes, please.
So I think mostly we don't realize that this world is a place of distress.
Yes.
So I think
That's what we'll come to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So now from the overall, yes, please.
So the distress is inevitable in material world.
That's what I'm going to come to. Yeah.
This verse can sometimes lead to passivity.
Yes, it can very well lead to passivity. But that is not the message of the Gita. It is, if you see, this verse did not make Arjuna passive.
Given that we are not evolved to grasp the complete thing and we don't have purification of heart, and avidya covers us to a great, what would be the point to know we have tried enough?
Yeah, maybe I should not have asked for questions. Because all these questions I'll address you in the course of the talk. Okay?
The question is so hard we could not even understand. What was the question?
That's the part of the world being dukkale. Okay, so so I'll be drawing a few points from different places. See, that whenever I give talks to new audiences. Okay. So we can have many. Okay. See, we can have many disagreements across many of the world's wisdom traditions. But if you look at almost all the wisdom traditions of the world, they agree on one thing. And not just wisdom traditions, even most people who have had some experience. There's one agreement that life is tough. Life is tough. Now you see, when you phrase it this way, whenever I phrase it this way, everywhere, I've spoken in America, I've spoken in UK, I've spoken in Australia, I've spoken in India, nobody disagrees with this. Life is tough. And we say the world is a place of misery? No. Life is tough. The idea is, yeah, my life is tough, but the world is not a place of misery. So, why is that? Because in one sense, life is tough is the lived experience of all of us. But the idea that the world is a place of distress, that seems to contradict our experience, at least the way we perceive the world, or at least the way the world is shown to us by the media. What happens is, everybody thinks that everyone else, or at least many people other than me, are happier than me. And I'll talk about that a little later. But the idea is that life is tough is something which we all can accept. And this is actually something is said by almost various wisdom traditions. So in the biblical tradition, it said that the world is a vale of tears. In Buddhist tradition, dukkha is considered one of the first truths of life. In fact, it is considered the first noble truth. And of course, in the Gita, it is said the world is dukkhalaya. So now, what does this imply? So this is our lived experience. Life is tough, and the world is a difficult place. That is a common teaching of various thinkers. In fact, even modern existentialist philosophers have said something similar. Alberto Camus, the existentialist philosopher, completely atheistic, aggressively atheistic, but he said that existence is suffering. Therefore, the only philosophical question worth asking is whether to commit suicide today or tomorrow. It's a very gloomy view of the world. And of course, he wrote many philosophical books which don't commit suicide today. Of course, I am simplifying his message. In some ways, he was very insightful. In some ways, his existentialism worked against him. But the point is that, what does this mean? The world is a place of distress. It can mean completely dark pessimism, that misery is inescapable and we are all destined for nothing but despair and gloom. That could be one implication. However, it could also have another implication, that it's realism and that can brighten our life. What is this realism? That misery is probable and we need to prepare for it. To understand this point, let's consider the word dukkhalaya. Alaya, what does it mean? House or place or abode. And dukkha is distress. Now, let's consider another word, Himalaya. What does Himalaya mean? Place of snow. Literally it means place of snow. Semantically, it refers to the place in the northern part of India, the mountain ranges which are called Himalayas. Now, Himalaya is filled with snow. But is that all that is there in the Himalayas? No. What else is there? Trees, rivers, caves, rocks, sages, okay, air. So there is basically what you're saying is there is great natural beauty over there, isn't it? People go there to see the exhilarating sights. Go over one of the peaks and look down from there. See the snow-capped mountains. We see the greenery. We see the wildlife. It's extraordinary beauty. And there can be thrill in climbing up mountain peak. There's risk, but there's also thrill. It's not just a physical act, but it's act of discipline and achievement. And people who are adventure seeking do that. So the point is that if somebody goes to the Himalayas and they start complaining, oh, it's so cold, it's so cold, it's so cold. People around say, you are growing so old. That's old news. That's just, everybody knows. What are you trying to say by this? So if we are going to go to the Himalayas, we have to be prepared for it to be cold. But once we accept that it's going to be cold, then there is a lot we can do there. Then after that we can enjoy the beauty, we can achieve something special. We can go to exalted sites. If you are from a materialistic perspective, we can go to climb mountains. From a spiritual perspective, we can go to the sacred places over there. But to do all that, we need to reset our baseline expectation. The temperature is not going to be comfortable. It's going to be cold and I have to accept it. Now, accept it doesn't mean that we go with thin clothes over there. We need to wear warm clothes and go. But we have to accept it. So similarly, when the Bhagavad Gita says this world is a place of distress, the point is, it is not that everybody has to be in distress forever. The point is that we need to reset our baseline expectation. That distress is something is going to come in our life. But accept it and move forward to do something worthwhile. Move forward to do something meaningful. If we are constantly complaining, oh, why is there this problem and why is there this problem and why is this like this and why is that like that, then we will never be able to do anything worthwhile in our life. Now once we accept it, now that doesn't mean that we have to be crushed by the distress. No, there are ways to deal with it. But no matter how much we deal with it, distress will seep in some way or the other. Even if we have the best warm clothes, so we may say that, okay, I have warm clothes, I'll protect myself from the cold. Yeah. But then, when we take a bath, we take out the clothes, we put on the clothes, that time we may have freezing cold. We cannot escape it completely. So distress, we have to accept the fact that life will have problems. But what can I do next? What can I do next? What is it that is meaningful enough in my life that will make these problems bearable? Just like somebody who goes to the Himalayas to climb up the mountain peak, to conquer say the Everest or the smaller peaks. For them there is a purpose. I want to achieve something special, something only a handful of human beings have achieved. And for that, I am ready to tolerate that. Tolerate all the cold over there, all the risk over there. So we cannot, when Bhagavad Gita says that this world is a place of distress, it does not mean that we have to always be in distress. But what it emphasizes is that we will not be able to escape distress for very long. Sooner or later, it will seep in our life. And the only way we can deal with distress is not just by insulating ourselves from it by making various arrangements. It's more by having a purpose that makes the distress bearable. So, if we don't have, and that's what Arjuna's situation is. See, in the case of Arjuna, he was, as I said, he was in great distress, such distress that he was crying. And what was the reason? Here, where he was fighting against his relatives. He was thinking, how can I fight against my elders? How can I shoot arrows against those whom I should be offering my respects, whom I should be offering flowers in respect? Katham bhishma mam samke dronam cha madhusudana ishudi pratyotsami puja bhavarasudana. So he was in great distress. But Krishna told him that, yes, you may not want to fight against them, but you are going to lose them sooner or later. Everybody is mortal, everybody is going to die. And you cannot escape that distress. But what you can do is, you can focus not on the fact that you have to face the distress of this fight. You can focus on the meaning and purpose of this fight. That you are actually helping create a better world. You are helping to establish a virtuous king in the world who will bring prosperity in people's life, or at least not bring atrocity in people's life, which is what Duryodhana would have done. So that purpose would make that pain bearable. So that is the basic point of the Gita. And if you look at it from another perspective, see how it is that when we face the worst, then we can prepare for the best. So if we know that we are going to travel through stormy seas, then we will prepare a sturdy ship. We won't just be complaining, oh, why is the sea so stormy, why is the sea so stormy? If it's very hot weather, we won't be very cold weather, we won't be constantly complaining about it. We will prepare for it. So the purpose of the intent of the Gita here is not to sentence us to misery. Rather, it is to prepare us for finding a purpose that will make the distress bearable. So, now regarding the just drawing something from the Buddhist perspective over here. The Buddhism says that this is a noble truth. Now we may say, life is that there's distress in the world. It's a miserable truth. Even if it is true, it's a miserable truth. How is it a noble truth? It's a pessimistic point. So how is it noble? Why is it called as a noble truth exactly? So first of all, some people will question, is this a truth also? Is it a place of distress? And I said that just rephrase it and everybody will agree to it. So the thing is that my life is tough, but if I do this, my life will become better. And that's how the world is not a place of distress. That's what we think. My life is tough, but the world is not a place of distress. That's how we reconcile the two. And in this particular situation, I have this job in which my boss loves to make my life miserable. So what does that say? That the harder you work, the longer the vacation your boss goes on. So, I am in a miserable position, but if I just get that job, if I were working under that boss, or if I were my own boss, then I would be miserable. Well, possibly, maybe not. Maybe we may not have that particular distress, we may not have that particular problem, but we'll have some other problem. It's like if we are in the ocean, we feel, this part of the ocean that I am is very stormy. And yes, it may be very stormy. If you just get to that part of the ocean, the storminess will be less. And yes, it may be less over there. But maybe the storminess is less over there and maybe there are sharks over there. So what happens is, wherever we go, there will be some form of distress or the other. And many of you are from India. So as compared to India in the West, the physical comforts are much more. Many of the things are relative. Of course, India is also changing. I don't want to essentialize India to one stereotype. But as compared to the physical comforts, maybe much more. At least there are other facilities. But then there are always trade-offs. Maybe it's a more lonely world over here. We don't have our family or extended community around us. And sometimes the work is more stressful. Mental health problems become a little more, sometimes a lot more. So some other problem comes up. So yes, I'm not saying that everywhere it's equally distressful. Like say right now the war is going on in Ukraine. And the people there in Ukraine, the people just have to leave their homes and go away. So they are in relatively far greater distress. We have our homes, we have our very comfortable situations. But it is not that even a comfortable situation is free from distress. There could be greater degrees of distress, there could be lesser degrees of distress. But distress is there everywhere. So it is not that it is not a truth. It's not a pessimism. It's not pessimism. It's realism. See, for example, now this glass has some water. So do a mental exercise and imagine there is no water in it. And I tell the organizers, can I have some water? There's no water in this. They say, why are you so pessimistic? There's water in it. Well, if there is no water and somebody says, say there is water over there. And that's saying there is water when there is no water, that's not optimism. That is stupidism. Now, if I say there is no water here and there is never going to be any water over here and I will die because of thirst, well, that is pessimism. But acknowledging that there is no water over here right now, that's not pessimism, that's realism. And then we can work how to fill the water, how to get water. So similarly, that there is some or the other form of dissatisfaction in life. That is something which is universally true. We acknowledge that and then we see what we can do about it. So, what is the noble truth over here? If you can say life is tough. So, how it actually can ennoble us. Understanding the truth can actually transform us positively. So, most of the world, when there is suffering, when there is distress, when there is toughness of life, we work for it, we work to deal with it by means. Means external resources we get. So we may improve outer resources, we may get technological resources, we may get financial resources. So if it's very cold, let's get heat. Let's have some facilities. And we need the money to get those facilities. And the means are required. So there are outer resources for dealing with distress. That is the means. But along with that, we also need something else. We have to improve our inner resources. Inner resources means we need to find meaning. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? There is universal meaning in terms of the purpose of life, and there is personal meaning. What am I doing? So, means and meaning are both required if we are to face the distress of life. So we could say the mistake of modern civilization is that we focus only on means. Now, most of the world's leaders today, they are focused on, okay, how do we solve the problems of the world? Okay, how can we increase the GDP? How can we decrease the inflation? How can we bring out more technological innovation? And all these are necessary. However, they are not sufficient. If we consider people who are depressed, people who are suicidal, some of those people may be in a state of great deprivation. They must be in great poverty and they commit suicide. But it's remarkable that most people who are in poverty don't end up committing suicide. Most of the people who commit suicide are not people who lack means. They are the people who lack meaning. Why am I living? What is the point of living? So what has happened is that they may have decided that a particular thing is the meaning of my life. Say, in general, again I don't want to essentialize, but what I have observed, I have spoken in universities on many occasions, in the West, when young people commit suicide, it is quite often because of relationship frustrations. Oh, I wanted to be this person rejected me. Again, suicide is a complex phenomenon. But in India, many times people commit suicide, young people, because they don't do well in their exams. So, I didn't get good marks. What is the use of my life? I want to be nobody. And they end up ending their lives. So what has happened is, if we find meaning in these things, or meaning in a particular relationship, or meaning in a particular achievement, and if that achievement becomes unachievable for us, or that relationship becomes unattainable for us, then there is no meaning left. And if there is no meaning left, then what is the point of living? So we need means and we need meaning. We all have some source of meaning in our life. What am I doing? Why am I doing? But is the source of meaning big enough to accommodate life's distresses? If it is not big enough, then what will happen is that source of meaning will not be able to shelter us. So if the meaning of my life is, when I have this relationship, and this relationship makes me feel I'm worthwhile, my existence matters, and the relationship ends somehow because of rejection or because of bereavement or whatever, then we may lose all meaning in our life. So we need meaning, and we need a sense of meaning that is big enough. And that is what the Bhagavad Gita provides. Arjuna is thinking of these two meanings at the start of the Gita. One is in terms of relationships and the other is in terms of achievement. He's thinking, if I fight and win the war, then I will have the achievement. My family will be the ruling family of the whole world. But the other side is, if I fight the war, then I have to kill my relatives. I'll have to kill those people with whom I am closely related. So these are the two sources of meaning for him. And which source of meaning is more important? Is gaining a kingdom worth losing one's relatives? Or is for preserving one's relatives, is it worth letting the whole kingdom be ruled by an exploitative, mean-minded, tyrannical person? He's unable to decide that. And thus he is lost. So for people who think, now what is the purpose of life? They say enjoyment. Well, okay. The problem is that if enjoyment or pleasure is the purpose of our life, what do we do when there are situations when there is no enjoyment? And we all will face situations like that. No, there will be situations when there will be just a lot of difficulty in our life. So if pleasure were the purpose of our life, and then pleasure is taken away from us, then what will sustain us? So pleasure as the basis of meaning in a person's life, And the pleasure is the basis of purpose. If pleasure is the source of meaning and purpose in a person's life, it is extremely fragile. It is extremely trivial. Because pleasure can go away at any time. And when pleasure goes away, what does one do after that? One of my friends is a psychologist, and he did his PhD in the post-celebrity lives of sports celebrities in America. Sports is a career that is extremely glamorous if you are successful. But even if you are successful, it's a short-lived career. Most people start making it big in their career by 35, 40. But by 35, 40, in most sports, that person is like a dinosaur. Like an ancient fossil, a curiosity object. You can come and maybe cut some ribbons or give some talks, but you're no longer relevant. So people often have to reinvent themselves. My whole life was geared to become a sports player, but now their career is over. Many of these celebrities, if they can't reinvent themselves, then they go into acute depression and they can disintegrate, they can succumb to addiction. Now, if they're successful, that means they have a lot of wealth with them, a lot of fame with them, and all that can contribute to disintegration. So the point I'm making is that we need meaning in our life. And that is the emphasis of the Gita. Arjuna had the means. Arjuna was expert in archery. He could have fought the war. He could have won the war. But his question was, is this war worth fighting? So, means and meaning, both are necessary to face life's challenges. Modern civilization, modernity focuses only on means, and it's important. But if that is all we focus on, then we end up having distress that nothing. Why should I bear this distress? Why should I live? What is the point of living? So, to understand the point of living, we need meaning. And Arjuna is facing this dilemma. Should I relationship or achievement? What should I focus on? So Krishna says that there is a higher purpose beyond all this. And what is that? That is lovingly harmonizing with my will. Becoming an agent of my wisdom, my compassion. The Gita says that the world moves purposefully. And God is the well-wisher of everyone. He's the benefactor of everyone. He wants the best for everyone. So if we align with the divine will, then each of us can contribute to making the world better, or at least our corner of the world better. And certainly, we can make our own life better. So that is the higher purpose. And that purpose may sometimes require pursuing achievements. Sometimes it may require focusing on relationships. Whatever it is. But that is the higher purpose. So Arjuna understands that I may be a well-wisher of Bhishma and Drona, and I don't want to fight against them. I don't want them to die. And certainly not at my hands. That's good sentiment. But Krishna tells Arjuna, Suhridam sarvabhutana gyatva ma shanti muchyati. Arjuna, know that you may be their well-wisher, but I am their greatest well-wisher. Right now, I know that they are in distress. You are thinking that they are in distress, or they will die and they will suffer. But I know that just fighting on Duryodhana's side is causing them great suffering. They would rather be fighting for you, but they are fighting on that side. So my plan will free them from this binding obligation because of which they have to fight on a side where their heart is not there. And they are virtuous souls. By the good deeds that they have done, they will be elevated to another destination, a better destination. So when Arjuna understands that Krishna's plan is far better than his own plan, then Arjuna peacefully and even purposefully aligns with Krishna's plan. So for all of us, the meaning of life is in terms of we using our talents, our abilities, we using what we have in a mood of service, in a mood of making a contribution. And when we do that, then life's distresses don't just become bearable, they actually can become transformative, they can elevate us. We can grow through the distresses, we can grow in wisdom, we can grow in devotion, we can grow closer to God through the distresses. So that's how it's ennobling. Ennobling means what? The nobility within us comes out. We all have various levels of desires. None of us has only one desire. We have many desires, and not just many desires, many levels of desires. Now, a part of us, we just want to eat food and enjoy. A part of us, we just want to watch TV and enjoy. A part of us may want to work hard and make it big in life. A part of us may want to work hard and we give earn a lot of money, give a lot in charity. A part of us may want to just be devoted to God. So there are various parts, there are various levels of desires within us. So there are some desires which we can say which are noble, which are good, and some which are not. So when Gita says, then this is idea, this is ennobling truth. So those which are worthwhile desires, those which are virtuous desires, those which are good desires, they will grow. And those desires which make our life trivial, because of which we waste our life, or at least underutilize our life, those desires will weaken and go. And in that way, what will happen is each one of us can find not just meaning and purpose in our life, but can find fulfillment in our life. And that fulfillment will be what will enable us to bear life's distresses. If we think, I will go to a place, maybe in terms of social power, in terms of personal wealth, I will go to a place where distress will never touch me. We will never come to that place. That's utopia. But what we can do is, we can find a purpose in life that will make the distress bearable. And that is something every one of us has the capacity. And I'll just conclude with 2 points over here. One point is, this idea of purpose making distress bearable is universal. So nobody likes to lift big weights. But if you go to a gym and lift big weights, why are we doing that? Because there's a purpose. I want a fitter body. I want a healthier version of me. So that we voluntarily accept that distress. Not only we accept, we actually pay the gym to accept that distress. We pay the gym money so that they will give us weights to lift. But why is that? It's distress, but there is meaning in that. Say when a couple decides to have a child. A newborn baby is recently my brother had a baby, so he told me that having a baby is far more demanding than the most demanding job I have ever had. It's literally 24/7. But there is fulfillment on that. There's a new life coming in, I'm taking care of this life, I'm helping this child grow up. There's great fulfillment, and that makes the distress bearable. So the idea that when something is meaningful for us, that can help us to bear distress, that is universal. It doesn't require necessarily a spiritual dimension of life to understand it. But there are various levels of meaning we can have, and there are some levels of meaning which can survive many of life's distresses. But if those are the only sources of meaning that we have, if somebody's purpose in life is, I want to have a fit body, I want to impress people by the kind of fitness and health and physique that I have. Well, if they get an injury and their body gets damaged, mutilated, then where are they going to find the meaning? So we can find meaning in various things, but eventually we need to find meaning in something that is enduring. And that is our connection with God, that is our service to Krishna. That's how we will grow in life. And that is where the Gita finally directs us. So when we find that purpose in life, the distresses become bearable. So that's one point. Another point I will make is that this idea that this world is a place of distress, this is not to be misused. What do I mean? Say, I don't know if I give this example here in Columbus. Those of you who have heard it before, kindly hear it again. That, say suppose some guest comes to our house and we are hosting them and they say, I'm feeling very cold. And we say, what to do? This world is a place of distress. Now, I say, then you say that's true, but that's not relevant here. You could just give me a blanket. Says, no, this world is a place of distress. Accept it. Well, fine, but this distress can be dealt with. Isn't it? So, if we don't understand the point of this point, so there is a point and there is a point of the point. Like sometimes we hear some speakers, they're brilliant, but they're not very organized. that they make great points, and you hear the point, but you can't figure out why are they saying this point. Isn't it? So what is the flow? What is the connection to the previous point? What is the connection to the next point? So there is a point, and there is a point of the point. Why is this point being made? So if we don't, and the point is that this world is a place of distress, dukkhalaya. But what is the point of the point? That is important to understand. If you don't understand that, then this can be completely misapplied. If we start taking that this world is a place of distress, now then we can say, where do we stop? No, a mother has a newborn baby and the baby is crying. Should the mother say, the world is a place of distress, let the baby cry? That would be monstrous. Monstrously apathetic. So the idea is that there are various levels of explanation for anything that we face. Let me see if I can find this slide. It's not here. So for the same event that we may have, there can be multiple levels of meaning. So, okay. This is actually, I was at a conference on mental health and spirituality. This was a real life incident at that time. One young woman, she spoke this. Let's say, suppose somebody is, so this girl was telling that she used to, while she was studying in university, she used to, by the side, work as a waitress and get some money. So once, she was taking water for a customer and the water glass slipped from her hand, it fell. And what happened was, by that she concluded that if I can't even carry a glass, how am I going to carry myself through life? And she ended up in depression because of that. Now how many of us have had a glass of water slip from our hand? Almost everybody. And for me as a speaker, sometimes when I'm giving a class and the glass of water slips, it's embarrassing. But we don't think that my life is ridiculous because of that. Why? Because the same incident, we can find different explanations for this. One is, could be, the glass was slippery because it just been washed and not been wiped properly. The washed glass was slippery. And maybe she was just walking around and somebody called out to her rudely and she got distracted by that. Because of that she slipped. Maybe she was walking along and the floor was uneven and she didn't notice it. Or maybe some people just don't have a lot of kinesthetic intelligence. They're not meant so much of physical work. They're physically inadequate. That could, maybe I need to do some kind of repetitive work. The same incident can have different levels of explanations. So similarly, where is it? Oh no, sorry. Okay. So going back to I am feeling cold. That example, a guest comes and says I am feeling cold. Now there could be various levels of explanation. So every situation can be placed in different causal frameworks. So why am I feeling cold? Maybe my clothes are not warm enough. Maybe I am in a room where the window doesn't shut properly. Maybe it's winter. Maybe we are living in a part of the world which is very cold. Maybe because of climate change the weather has become cold. I was speaking this slide and one person in the audience commented, he missed one point. Maybe I am having fever. That could be one explanation.
Yeah.
And now, beyond all these explanations is that okay, distress is a part of the material world. So now we can't jump to that explanation all the time. We have to find every event that happens in our life. We have to place it in the most constructive frame of reference. Constructive frame of reference, what do I mean? It's like a cause and effect. Or event and its cause. If this has happened, why has this happened? We want to make sense of it. So when we want to make sense of it, we could make sense of it in multiple ways. But which is the most, each of these could be, all of these could be right at one level. But which is the most constructive? Which is something which helps me move ahead with my life? So if somebody is living in if you are in Columbus and it's winter time, then it's cold, then you could say that this part of the world is very cold. It's accepted. But if it's somewhere we are feeling cold, like, oh, I'm living in a cold part of the world. But that's not the reason right now. And we have kept the window open. Close the window. So we have to find the right causal context, right frame of reference in which to analyze a particular event that happens in our life. So when will it be pessimistic that this world is a place of distress? When will that statement be pessimistic? When we use that as the explanation for every distress in life and we do nothing about it. That's how passivity might come. So what you're saying about distress being, is it inevitable? Well, some or other form of distress will be inevitable. But inevitable doesn't mean that we have to always accept that distress and live in that distress. The same, say, disease is considered one of the 4 major distresses of life. But the same tradition that tells us this, the Vedic wisdom tradition, which tells us that distress is one of the major problems of life, also has a whole body of knowledge called Ayurveda, which is meant to treat disease. So, it is not that every time somebody gets a disease, the doctor says, oh, what to do, this world is a place of distress, live with the disease. Well, yeah, I know the world is a place of distress, but I know your duty. If you are not doing it, I'll go to some other doctor. Isn't it? So, we all have our roles to play. And that means, I talk about means and meaning for dealing with distress. So, sometimes means can help in dealing with distress. And we all have to play our part in developing the means and implementing the means. Like if somebody is in software and then customer support. What does it mean? When the customer is in some trouble and we have to help resolve the customer's trouble. So if somebody is hungry, then we cook food and we offer him food. That's also means we relieve distress. So there are various times, when distresses come, there are times when means can help us to relieve the distress. But and when the means can relieve us the distress, then we need to put that distress in that particular causal frame and address it at that. We need to address practical problems practically. We can't escalate every problem to the level, oh, this world is a place of distress. Like say, if somebody eats a dozen ice creams on a cold night, and then the next morning they wake up with a terrible throat. In the previous night they say, more ice cream. And now they say, ice cream! They scream in pain. Now, we can say, you have that poor throat. This world is a place of distress. This is because of past karma. Well, yeah, past karma, but past night's karma. So, there is no need to talk about past karma or the nature of the world when we can find an immediate cause. So if a student doesn't study for the exam and fails, and the parents are disturbed, says, oh, don't be disturbed, this world is a place of distress. No, that distress did not come because of this world, that distress came because of your irresponsibility. So we have to place the problems that we face in the right causal context. But no matter how many causal contexts we can analyze, no matter how many means we develop, sometimes in spite of all these, we will face distress that no causal context can explain. That's the time when we understand this world is a place of distress and that's why this is happening. Like some people may live very healthy and their dietary habits are good, they exercise, they are regulated and still they may get cancer. Now what do we do with that? Okay, whatever he could have done to take care of health, he did. But in spite of the God, he said, what can we do? There is distress in this world, it's unavoidable. But if somebody is a chronic smoker and then they get cancer, they know what to do. This world is a place of distress. Well, people like you are increasing the distress in this world. So, the idea is we evoke the distressful nature of the world not as a default explanation for all distresses. Rather, when no normal explanation for the distress makes sense or they don't work. Like somebody has a disease and you're not able to diagnose the disease also, you will not cure it. Then sometimes it happens, then what do we do? Okay, that time, this world is a place of distress. But if somebody starts jumping to that as the first explanation, then that will be a problem. That will make us passive, that will make us irresponsible. That will make us a further cause of distress in the world. So our first thing should be, whenever we face distress, okay, what is my meaning and purpose in life? And how does this deal with it? So if we are coming to the temple because at that time, in the temple we get spiritual wisdom, we feel spiritual strength, we get spiritual joy. And we're driving along the road. And then suddenly, what happens is, we are hit, or somebody just cuts us across the road. We feel angry, that's a distress. Now, does that mean we should chase after that person and give them a hearing? Or we take them to court and give them a hearing there? Well, maybe not. But if somebody is a cop, a traffic cop, and somebody cuts across and they see that, and they say, oh, what to do, this world is a place of distress. No, it's your duty. So if it's our duty, then it's our duty to handle some means by which the distress of the world can be minimized, then we have to do that diligently. But if that is not our primary duty, that is not our primary purpose, then okay, there are people like that, they make a mess of things. Eventually they will be dealt with. But let me not get worked up by that. Yes, these kind of people are there. Let me just tolerate it and move on with the purpose of my life. So for us, which means to use to deal with distress, or when to not use any means and just accept that this is distress, that we need to understand what is the purpose of my life. As Prabhupada says in the 7th canto purport, I'll try to find that quote, that he says, we have to be always healthy and stout in mind and intelligence to discern the purpose of, to distinguish the purpose of life from a life full of problems. There are many things wrong in the world around us. There are many things wrong maybe in our corner of the world, maybe in our own family. There are many things wrong with us. Now we can't fix all of the things which are wrong even with ourselves, what to speak of with the world. But what is the thing that is most important for us? What is the purpose of our life? We focus on that, and through that we will grow. Through that we will evolve. Through that we will progress towards higher meaning, higher purpose and higher fulfillment of life. And that is what Krishna tells Arjuna. In one sense, at the beginning of the Gita and at the end of the Gita, there is no difference in Arjuna's external situation. Arjuna still has to fight the war. Krishna doesn't even give Arjuna any past life explanation. Bhishma was this person in this life and you were this person and you did this and that's why now you have to fight against each other. Krishna doesn't do any of that. What Krishna does, what differentiates Arjuna at the start of the Gita and at the end of Gita is, Arjuna gets a higher vision of life, a higher understanding of the purpose of life. And that's why at the end of the Gita, Arjuna says, Karishye vachinam tava. I will do your will. He understands that his purpose in life is not just to win a kingdom. His purpose in life is not just to protect his relatives. His purpose is to lovingly align with God's will. And all other things will eventually fall in place. And that is the purpose which transforms his confusion at the start of the Gita into conviction at the end of the Gita. So he says he's ready with his boat. Ashto moha sutilabdha sat prasadayana achyuta. Those vigata sandeha karishye vachinam. I will do your will. And by hearing the Gita, we also can gain that higher purpose. That let me look at what abilities I have been given, let me look at what resources I have, and let me see how I can be an agent of good in the world, in a mood of service to God. Doing God's will doesn't just mean chanting the holy names or coming to satsang. Yes, that's important, no doubt, because by that we stay connected with God. But it also means that we act in a mood of service in the world. We use our abilities to be agents of positive change. That is, loka sangraha. Krishna says, loka sangraha mevapi sampashyan kartumarasi. Krishna says in 320 the Gita. That act to maintain the world, maintain the order of the world, maintain the means that help people combat the distresses of the world. That is also the part that we do. And yes, and this can include various things. Like I said, doing the will of God can mean taking care of our family. Doing the will of God in a mode of service can mean doing our job responsibly. It can include taking care of our health. But in all of these, sometimes we may face obstacles. If those are the only source of our meaning in life, then we'll be thwarted. But if those are included in a higher meaning, because this body is a gift of God, so I'll take care of the body. I'll do exercise. Because this family has been arranged for me by God, therefore I'll do my family responsibilities. Because I'm in this job, ultimately by God's arrangement. So I'll do this job. So if we see it in the light of our service to God, then we will have a means and source of meaning that will never be thwarted. And that's how yam labdhva cha aparam labham manyate nadhikam tatah. Yasmin sthito na dukkhena gurunapi vicharate. Krishna says, once you have this vision of life, then you will not be constantly craving for something else. And even if great distress comes, you will not be shaken or shattered by that. You will persist through that, you will grow through that. So I'll summarize what I spoke today. Broadly, I spoke 5 points. So first point I spoke was that what this Dukkhalayam verse means in the context of the Gita. The context, Arjuna is in distress and Krishna doesn't say that, oh you are in distress, so stay in distress. That's what the purpose of this, that's what Gita is. No. In the implicit emphasis of the text also, that this world, the place of distress, is a passing point. Key point is, if we attain Krishna, then we'll go beyond the distress also. Attaining Krishna can mean going to his abode. It can also mean turning towards him in our consciousness and attaining proximity to him. And then third part was, what does this mean in terms of the overall philosophy of the Gita? So, that this world, that we may not accept this world as a place of distress, but we accept that life is tough. Our hope is that if my life becomes like someone else's, then it will be happy. It will be easier and happier. That's what we think. And yes, there are degrees of distress in the world, and there are some means by which we can decrease some distresses. But if means are all that we focus on, then we'll be frustrated. But along with means, we need meaning, because distress will seep in through somehow or the other. So the Buddhist tradition says that this is a noble truth. That means it will be ennobling. How will it ennoble? Because the distress, to make it bearable, we need to find a meaning that is big enough. We all have sources of meaning, but often they are small sources of meaning. And they make our consciousness small, they make our life small. But when we face distress and those sources of meaning are shattered, somebody thinks this relationship is the meaning of my life. This getting this much grades in my exam is the meaning of my life. And those are shattered. Then either we get shattered or we find the bigger meaning. And Arjuna's sources of meaning, oh, I want to be with my relatives. I want to rule a kingdom. That's what I was born for. Those sources of meaning came in severe conflict at the start of the Gita. And he didn't know what to do. So Krishna gave him a bigger source of meaning. So Dukkhalaya does not mean that everybody is sentenced to distress forever. It means that it's like reset our baseline expectation. Distress is going to come. What do you do with it? Can we, just like Himalayas, it's going to be cold, but what are you here for? Focus on that. So we need to find a source of meaning and purpose that is big enough to make the distress bearable. And in the Gita, that's big enough sources that we act as instruments of the wisest person, the most benevolent person, God, to bring about positive change in the world and in our own lives. And while we act in that mood, we need to understand this point of the world being a sense of distress properly. It's not the default explanation that we go to for every distress. If something has a more immediate practical explanation solution, we work on that. But this when none of the various causal frameworks work for explaining a problem, then we accept that this is a distress part of the world. We accept it and let me move on with the purpose of life. When we act in this way, then we all can find not freedom from distress, but we can find a meaning that will raise us above distress. I say, we may have to live with distress, but we won't have to live in distress. That will be a part of our life, but our life will be richer with many other things in our life. Let's conclude with a prayer. We pray to Krishna that just as he infused Arjuna through the wisdom of the Gita with an empowering sense of purpose, that he guide us also to find a similar empowering purpose in our lives today. Shri Krishna Bhagwan ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Was your question answered? Or that's it. Thank you. Yours also. Or no?
So a lot of
I'll complete.
people say that distress or dukkha
it actually does not exist. It is the state of mind of that person.
Okay. When somebody says that, go and slap him. Why did you slap him? No, there's no slap. It's a state of the mind. Okay. Don't do that actually. Well, see, there are levels of analysis, and in different ways, like I talk about different causal frameworks. So there's one causal framework where it can be said that distress is primarily a mental construct, but that is not the causal framework that we can use all the time. So what does it mean? From a philosophical perspective, we can say that the soul is different from the body, and in one sense the soul doesn't experience any distress. It's like we could take the example of a virtual reality or somebody watching a horror movie. Now, when somebody watching a horror movie, they'll be sitting comfortably in their home. But as they're watching that horror movie, that monster is gobbling up everyone, tearing people apart, and horrendous scenes over there. What will happen is, this person who's watching is scared. He's terrified. So, now we can say it's all illusion. Well, yeah, it's illusion, but for the person who is going through that, it's not an illusion. So, we could just slap that person a little bit and the monster has come on. No, it's not a monster. Oh, you are the monster. They may think like that. So, but at least you can pull a person who is watching a horror movie and is horrified out of that. But for us, when we are also fixated in the material illusion like this, Purusha Prakriti Stohi, Bhumte Prakriti Janmuna, our consciousness is caught in matter. But there is no quick way to come out of it. There is an elaborate process required to get our consciousness out of this virtual reality that we are in. So for the soul, material reality is like virtual reality. So in that sense, we could say distress is just a mental construct. But that mental construct is real right now. And unless that person acknowledges, oh, this is a horror movie, I thought, like say, people who go to watch a horror movie, they know it's a horror movie. But somebody goes to watch a romantic comedy and that turns out to be a horror movie. What happened? So for most people, life is like that. They think it's going to be like a romantic comedy and then it turns out to be a horror movie. What happened? So only when we acknowledge that there is distress, then we can work to come out of the distress. So that's why the Bhagavad Gita doesn't say, it can say both statements. For example, Dukkhalaya Shashvata is there, Janmrutyaya Jaravayati Dukkha Dosham Dosham, that kind of statements are there in Gita. But there are also statements like, what is the CC verse? Bhadra Sarva. Ei Sava Manodharma. Ei Bhala, Ei Manda, Ei Sava Brahma. Thank you. That this is good, this is bad, this is all illusion. That kind of statements are also there. But those statements are spoken from a particular level of realization. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, this is a question which Uddhava asks Krishna. He says, scripture sometimes says this is good and bad, and sometimes scripture says nothing good or bad. This is a mental construct. So what is it? So Krishna answers over there that it depends on the level of realization. So for people functioning in the world, we have to listen, this is good, this is bad. And we have to focus on what is good and avoid what is bad. So, and over a period of time, we'll understand, okay, actually ultimately this is just good and bad, everything is beyond that. The real reality is beyond all that. So, even if distress is a mental construct, it's just in the mind. Well, the mind is real for us. The mind's impact is real for us. Even if say all your distress is in the mind. Okay, but what do I do with it? I need some real solutions for that, isn't it? So even if we say distress is in the mind, we need some real solutions. Okay? Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, you were talking about the ice cream example, and then, okay, he's gotten a cold or bad because last night it was. But then, why did he do that? Because, so if we keep analyzing how far should we, ultimately we come to the conclusion that I've turned away from Krishna, that's why my consciousness is in a mess, and that's why I'm doing so many actions which is causing me all the distress. Is that
true? Great. So there are, again, taking this point itself, we can broadly analyze, okay, question, yeah. So if we say that somebody got a terrible throat because they overate the previous night. But why didn't they overate the previous night? Maybe because they lack control of senses, or they are just desperately craving for pleasure, they're looking for comfort. You can go back, trace further and further back, and ultimately you will come to the point that they're disconnected from Krishna. And that's why they're in distress. Yes, that is true. And in that sense, the only problem in the world is the lack of Krishna consciousness. At the same time, Prabhupada also did so many things. Prabhupada said that we want to have an ashram. Prabhupada said we need organization into this. Prabhupada didn't just say that for our movement to spend, we need only Krishna consciousness. We have Krishna consciousness, but Krishna consciousness can manifest in different ways. If the only problem in the world was Krishna consciousness alone, then why did Prabhupada have to travel from India to America? Because Krishna consciousness was not appreciated by Indians at that time. So then you can say another problem is that lack of Krishna consciousness, but lack of appreciation of Krishna consciousness. That's another problem. Then what you have to do is create appreciation of Krishna consciousness. Create a circumstance where people will appreciate it, will at least explore Krishna consciousness before they can appreciate it. So there can be multiple levels of measures for it. That is also a challenge. I will come to that point. So the point is that it depends on context, what level of analysis a person is supposed to do. So broadly, there is the immediate cause, there is the remote cause, there is the ultimate cause. So the ultimate cause for all problems is that we are disconnected from Krishna. But there is an immediate cause. Say for example, somebody gets malaria. The immediate cause is that they were bitten by a mosquito. Now if the remote cause is there are 4 people in the house, but only one got mosquito, one got malaria. Then you could go further, the mosquito bit only one person. Now why did the mosquito discriminate? Well, there you could go to the remote cause. That yes, maybe this person had some negative karma, because of which the mosquito bit that person. Well, okay, but what do we do about that? There's not much. Generally, through astrology and through karma kanda, through some pious rituals, people try to deal with the remote karma also. So in general, most of us, we can focus either on the immediate karma and try to deal with it, or not immediate karma, immediate cause and deal with it, or we can focus on the ultimate cause and deal with it. So which level to address a problem, that will depend on time, place, circumstance. So yes, the ultimate cause is there, but do we address the ultimate cause all the time? Or do we address other things at different times? That is also, if you consider Prabhupada's movement. Prabhupada wanted that we focus on addressing the ultimate cause. But Prabhupada also addressed specific causes. Prabhupada talked about how family is disrupted. And that's why social structure has to be arranged. Prabhupada talked about starting food for life. Prabhupada created specific systems for addressing specific issues also. So we also work at multiple levels. We work at all those levels in a mood of service to Krishna. Now what all levels we need to work at, that could be a moment of discussion, that could be a topic of discussion or even debate in our movement. But there are various levels at which we can address problems with the purpose of Krishna consciousness and with our consciousness being Krishna conscious. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for the amazing lecture. I wanted to ask, different people are at different stages of devotion. Say for example, somebody is not at a very elevated state, so they are not from Buddha Prasanatma like in that state. So they have to use the nescience. I was reading Isha Upanishad, I think 14th verse says like we have to use nescience and transcendental knowledge to achieve, otherwise we cannot cross. But it's not applicable universally for everybody. If somebody is in a very high elevated state, they can just rely on the Shuddha Naam.
Okay, so for those who are not at a high level of realization, they need to have practical means for dealing with problems. And those who are at a high level, they may not need practical means. Yes and no. In the sense that, yes, for most of us, we have to look at practical means. But if that is all that we are looking at throughout our life, then we will not grow spiritually. Because okay, this problem, I solve this. 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 Okay, but am I raising my consciousness through this, or am I just simply trying to fight this problem, that problem, that problem? Am I trying? So we need to grow also. So we can't focus only on the practical. Actually, through the practical, gradually we are prompted toward the transcendental. That was the genius of the Vedic context also, saying if somebody goes to Ayurvedic doctor, an Ayurvedic doctor will give practical medicine that works. At the same time, the Ayurvedic doctor will be a theistic person. If they will talk about Vishnu and chanting the names of Vishnu, something like that, that will prompt them towards spirituality. So what has happened in the traditional context, means and meaning were both harmoniously provided. In today's world, the providers of mean and the means and the providers of meaning are often considered to be opposite to each other. Most of the means comes from science, and most of the meaning comes from spirituality. And often science thinks that spirituality is hocus pocus, and some spiritualists think that science is all a nonsense. So that's where the problem comes up. But they serve different purposes. Science can help us to make the outer world better. Spirituality can help us to make the inner world better. And so science can give us means, spirituality can give us meaning. So both can go together. Now, even for advanced, for very evolved souls also, they may also at times take up some material solutions. So, when say we get a fracture, my world has ended, what happened? We often identify very strongly with that world. For somebody who is a very evolved soul, they will not identify with that world. For them, if they get a fracture on their hand, that will be like a puncture, a flat in their car tire. It's not a suffering as much as it's an inconvenience. But whether you call it a suffering or inconvenience, it has to be dealt with, isn't it? So they will also go to a doctor. They will also seek treatment. But they will not be that agitated by it. Krishna says that that they will not be too disturbed when there is distress, and they will not be too elated when there is happiness. Because they are focusing on a higher purpose. So yes, we do need both practical knowledge and transcendental knowledge for dealing with life's challenges. Okay. Thank you. Any last question?
There is one question on YouTube, but should we take in-person question?
Yes, in person first.
Yes.
Impersonal after.
Thank you so much for the class. I was asked recently by someone who is new. We were also talking about this verse, meaning about the world being a place of misery as well as happiness, dualities. So then the question that she asked was, how do we understand that we are acting in accordance to God's will? Like, how do we know that we are trying to work in such a way that it's pleasing the Lord? Because there's so many points saying that our aim is to please the Lord, to satisfy His senses, not our senses. So how, as a new person, how do I explain?
Okay. How do we understand what is the will of God? Or how do we know that we are doing the will of God? Well, there are, as I said, two different aspects to it. One is that God does not want us to be like a programmed robot. It is, sometimes you give the example of puppet. Because Prabhupada also says puppet. Oh Lord, make me dance like a puppet. Nachao, nachao, kashtela putri, nachao singh. Now yes, that's a valid metaphor, but it's not a complete metaphor. Because a puppet does not love the puppet master. Now, Krishna doesn't just want our compliance or obedience. He wants our heart, He wants our love. And that means that He wants us to voluntarily offer our heart. So He has given us free will and He wants us to use that. So when you talk about God's will, it's not just like a path, it's more like a direction. It's like so what is the broad direction? At a basic level, whenever we face any situation in life, actually in the Mahabharata, when Abhimanyu is killed, Arjuna is shattered, and after that he lashes out at his brothers. He said, all of you, are all your weapons just ornaments? Could not one of you protect my son? He's enraged. At that time, Krishna comes and hugs Arjuna from the side. And Krishna tells Arjuna, oh Arjuna, in this world, adversities befall everyone. The wise people and the unwise people, the good people and the bad people. But the difference is that amid adversities, wise people act in ways that make things better. Whereas the unwise act in ways that make things worse. So oh Arjuna, look at your brothers. They are grief-struck by the death of Abhimanyu just as you are. Please don't speak words that will increase their grief. So what does this mean? Krishna is not going into big philosophy over here. He's not escalating here. This word is dukkha. He's not saying, I told you don't be attached to the body. You're not the body. Don't be attached to relatives. Krishna there are various causal frameworks. Krishna doesn't go to any of those highly philosophical frameworks. What does he say over here is, it's a very human level. Just stay in distress, don't increase their distress. So what does it broadly mean? We can say that God's will is that whatever situation we are in, we act in a way that makes things better, not makes things worse. I mean, we say, how do I know what will make things better? Well, if there are 50 things in our life, you can at least say there are 5 or 10 things which I know if I do this will make things better. And if I stop doing these things, it will ensure that things will become worse. We certainly know, at least in some areas of our life, there are some areas where you could say it's muddled, like shades of grey. But there are areas of black and white. So if we start acting and doing the things which we know will make things better, and we stop doing the things which will make things which will make things worse, then in that way itself we open ourselves to higher wisdom. We open ourselves to a greater revelation from God. So doing God's will can begin with something as simple as, how can I act to make things better? That's from purely, you could say, a person who does not necessarily have any access to God directly, who is not connected with God's representatives or even the scripture. If you just understand the principle that God is good, God wants the good for everyone. So God wants me to also act in a way that will make things good, better. So we start with that. And from that point of view, okay, what can I do to make things better? So maybe I can get a better understanding of life. Maybe I can get a worldview that helps me understand my place and purpose in life better. That can open a person to spiritual wisdom. And in spiritual wisdom, what happens? 2 things. First is we directly connect with God. And that, when we worship the Lord, we chant His holy names, that is, we are directly connected with Him. And that helps us understand His will better. Ultimately, one aspect of His will is that we love Him. So when we do the activities that develop our devotion for Him, we are doing His will. And there we also gain wisdom. We hear from various spiritually minded people, we can take insights and guidance from them. And then we get a clear understanding. How can I do God's will? It is not that any one person will have a monopoly on God's will. This is the person who will tell you what is God's will. Krishna is there with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, but Krishna doesn't tell Arjuna his will directly. In fact, Krishna could have finished the whole Bhagavad Gita in 6 words. I am God, obey me, fight. Bhagavad Gita over. Krishna didn't do that. Why? Because Krishna's purpose was not just to get Arjuna to do his will. Krishna's purpose was to equip Arjuna with a process of philosophical contemplation, of philosophical reasoning, by which he could align himself with God's will. And that's why Krishna doesn't give a pat answer to Arjuna. And we see later on, even in in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam 7th chapter, when Ashwatthama is to be punished, Krishna doesn't tell Arjuna what to do. But Arjuna discerns and decides, and it is in alignment with Krishna's will. So like that. So we start with 3 things I would say. First, start with doing what is good, and open ourselves to further wisdom of God, and connect ourselves with those who can better help us better understand God's will. Thank you.
Should we take one question? Last question from YouTube. So Sumitra Mataji is asking, how do we deal with senseless suffering, or when distress interferes with our purpose that we have held all along and had been a compass? Can we also reconcile working on the means while we strive for meaning at the same time? Are these two sequential or concurrent?
Okay. How do we deal with senseless suffering? There are many questions over here. First of all, are these two sequential or complementary, like dealing with me, or contradictory?
No. So that is for the means and the...
Yeah, are the means and meaning, are they sequential or?
Yeah, are they same? Are these two sequential or concurrent?
Concurrent, okay. Well, it depends. Actually, both of them are complementary. We need to deal with means and we need to deal with meaning. If we need prasad for the body, we need wisdom for the soul. You need both. So both are complementary. Which to be prioritized when, that can vary from situation to situation. Now, this is where when we face senseless suffering, that is where we need intellectual humility. Now, humility is something which is, you may say, it's physical humility. We bow down before God, we bow down to those who are respectable, and that's relatively easy. But intellectual humility means the willingness to accept that not only do I not know, maybe I can't know. That I am a finite being and the world is endlessly complex. So maybe I can't know. And although I can't know, still I have to function in my life. So we need intellectual humility to some extent. And it's not as difficult a demand because we see that we work with that. Even in science itself, there is so much about the universe that we don't know. There's so much about the human body we don't know. So we accept, I don't know this, but this is what I know, and let me work with this. We don't know what causes cancer, but we know, okay, these things may be able to cure cancer. So let's work with that. We try to find out what are the causes of cancer also, but we work. So accepting that some things may not make sense within whatever worldview we have, whatever operational frame of reference we are using, that is something which we do all the time. We accept that sometimes things don't make sense. Like we are driving along and somebody cuts across. Why did the person do that? We don't know what happened to you, who damaged you. You don't want to ask that person. We just move on with our life. So we all deal with senselessness. And so there is making sense of suffering and there is making sense in suffering. We can't always make sense of suffering. Why did this happen? So if you take an example of firefighter. Generally, if a firefighter rushes to a site of a fire, they will try to find out what caused the fire. That will help them to deal with the fire better. But sometimes the fire is spreading so rapidly and there is no one there who has any information and they can't figure out any immediate cause of fire. So what do they do at that? They can't make sense of the fire, but they can still make sense amid the fire. Okay, this fire is spreading like this, we need to stop it from going to that building, but there are a lot of people living over there. Let's stop that. Then we'll look at this, and then afterwards we'll do some investigation to find out what caused the fire. So similarly, there are times when we can't make sense of the distress in our life, but we can still make sense in the distress. That means we can act in a way that we can minimize the distress, or at least stop the worsening of the distress. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna.